There's a moment everyone has, lying awake, suddenly aware that someday you simply won't exist. It's a strange, cold kind of fear, and it doesn't fully go away. That exact fear was already old, 300,000 years before you were born. For at least 300,000 years, humans have deliberately buried their dead, with flowers, with tools, with ochre, with rituals no other species on Earth performs. What they believed happened after death shaped almost everything about how they lived. To understand that fear, we have to go back to the very first humans who ever faced it. Death, for most of evolutionary history, was just an event, a body left where it fell. Then something changed, and we started doing something no animal before us had ever done. It wasn't useful down there. It may have been the first funeral offering in human history. Not every scientist agrees it was intentional, but the debate itself tells you something important. Somewhere very early, humans started treating dead bodies differently than everything else. An elderly Neanderthal had been laid in a carefully dug pit, curled on his side, deliberately positioned. This was the discovery that forced four scientists to ask, did Neanderthals bury their dead on purpose? Decades later, a cave in Iraq called Shanidar produced the most famous burial of them all. In the 1960s, archaeologist Ralph Seletsky found clumps of ancient pollen packed around one skeleton. It became known as the flower burial, a Neanderthal apparently laid to rest with wildflowers. Science is honest like that. Even a beautiful theory has to survive being questioned. But even without the flowers, dozens of Neanderthal burials show clear, deliberate, careful placement. Bodies curled in fetal positions, tucked into pits dug specifically for them, again and again. That Shanidar skeleton also showed something else. An old man who'd survived crippling injuries for years. He was blind in one eye, missing an arm, and likely couldn't hunt, yet his group kept him alive. Neanderthal compassion, it turns out, started long before the burial itself. Neanderthals weren't the only ones doing this. Our own species was doing it too. At Qafzeh Cave in Israel, early Homo sapiens buried their dead around 100,000 years ago. One skeleton was covered in red ochre, a mineral pigment humans clearly valued enough to bring underground. Others were buried with pierced shell beads, jewelry that had traveled miles from the nearest coastline. Nearby, at Skhul Cave, one burial included something almost unbelievably specific, a wild boar's jawbone, placed deliberately into the arms of the dead. Nobody accidentally arranges a jawbone into a corpse's arms. That takes intention. Objects placed with the dead only make sense if you believe the dead can still use them. That's the quiet, radical idea buried inside every one of these graves, that death might not be the end. Red ochre shows up in burial after burial, across tens of thousands of years and thousands of miles. Many researchers think its blood-red color symbolized life itself, maybe even the hope of rebirth. We can't ask them directly what they believed, but their choices speak loudly enough. The single most breathtaking burial site sits in Russia, called Sungir. About 34,000 years ago, in the depths of the Ice Age, someone buried two children there. They were laid head to head, covered in more than 10,000 carved ivory beads between them. Each bead is estimated to have taken roughly an hour of careful, painstaking work to carve. That means this single burial represents literally thousands of hours of collective labor. An entire community working for what might have been months to honor two children who had died. This wasn't practical. It wasn't about survival. It was pure devotion to memory. They were buried with ivory spears, carved animal figures, and tools, equipment for wherever they were going. Grief, it seems, was already powerful enough to organize an entire Ice Age society. In 2013, cavers exploring Rising Star Cave in South Africa found something nobody expected. A deep, almost inaccessible chamber, packed with the bones of a small-brained relative called Homo naledi. Its brain was roughly the size of an orange, a fraction the size of ours. And yet, the chamber's location suggests those bodies were deliberately carried down there, again and again. It's one of the most contested claims in all of paleoanthropology, and the debate is far from settled. But if it's true, it means the impulse to deal with death didn't require a big brain at all. It might mean this impulse is older and stranger than the story of our own species alone. We're not the only species that reacts to death. Elephants linger over bones, touching them for hours. But grief alone isn't ritual. Ritual requires symbols, planning, and shared belief. And that's exactly what separates a fallen body from a funeral. So what is it about the human mind that turned death into something we needed rituals for? The answer seems to be self-awareness. We're the only species that knows, with total certainty, that we will die. Psychologists actually have a name for what happened next: terror management theory. The idea is simple. Once you know you're going to die, that knowledge creates unbearable anxiety. So humans built entire cultures, beliefs, and rituals specifically to manage that anxiety. Belonging to a group, believing in an afterlife, having rituals, all of it pushes back against that terror. Burying someone with tools and beads wasn't just about them. It was about calming the fear of the living. In that sense, ritual was medicine, long before medicine as we know it ever existed. And belief in an afterlife didn't stay simple. It grew more elaborate the more humans thought about it. Around 9,000 years ago, in the ancient city of Jericho, people began doing something new entirely. They removed skulls from buried bodies, covered them in plaster, and painted faces back onto them. These plastered skulls may be some of the earliest attempts to keep the faces of ancestors present. This is likely one of the earliest roots of ancestor worship, a practice found across nearly every culture since. Some ancient groups practiced what's called secondary burial, returning to a body long after death. The bones would be cleaned, gathered, and reburied, sometimes moved between multiple sacred sites. It wasn't one funeral. It was a whole relationship with the dead that could last for generations. Death, in this worldview, wasn't a single moment. It was a slow, ongoing transition. Some of the oldest cave art in the world appears near burial sites, not by accident. Some researchers think these paintings were part of the ritual itself, messages left for the dead or the gods, or both. Art, religion, and grief may have all been tangled together from the very beginning. Stories like this were probably told at firesides for tens of thousands of years, in one form or another. Every culture that followed built its own version of the same idea. The dead go somewhere. They're still watching. Belief in some form of afterlife shows up almost everywhere anthropologists have ever looked. So why would that idea evolve independently again and again in isolated cultures across the planet? One likely answer: it made unbearable grief bearable and unbearable fear survivable. A group that could process grief and keep functioning had a real advantage over one that couldn't. Ritual gave grief a shape, a beginning, a middle, and an end. Without that shape, grief can spiral endlessly. With it, a community knows exactly what to do next. That, more than anything, may be the true origin of the funeral. But not every ancient death was treated with the same gentleness. Some bodies from this era show no burial at all, just left exposed for reasons we may never fully know. Maybe there wasn't time, maybe the group had scattered, maybe belief itself simply varied from place to place. Ritual wasn't universal or constant. It was something humans built up unevenly over enormous stretches of time. But the general trend is unmistakable. Burial rituals grew more elaborate as human minds grew more complex. And that complexity eventually gave us something else entirely: monuments built purely for the dead. Around 11,600 years ago, in what's now Turkey, people raised massive carved stone pillars. Some archaeologists believe this site, Göbekli Tepe, may have been built around a shared reverence for death and ancestors. This was built before farming, before pottery, before permanent villages by hunter-gatherers. It suggests something startling. Reverence for death may have come before civilization itself, not after. It's possible the fear of death and the need to manage it is what built the first real societies. Not food, not farming, but grief and the desperate need to make sense of it together. It's a strange thought that death might be one of the true architects of human civilization. Look at a modern funeral, and you'll see the same bones of this ancient behavior still intact. We still gather, we still bring flowers, we still leave meaningful objects behind. We still speak about the dead as if some part of them continues somewhere. None of that is new. All of it is inherited, passed down from people who never met us. And so is the fear underneath it, largely unchanged for 300,000 years. An early human sitting awake by a dying fire felt something close to what you feel now. That thread connects you directly to Shanidar, to Sungir, to Sima, to Los Huesos. You are, quite literally, the descendant of people who refuse to let death go unanswered. Every generation, in every corner of the world, chose to respond to death with meaning instead of silence. That choice, repeated for hundreds of thousands of years, is one of the most human things we've ever done. They gathered, they mourned together, they built meaning out of loss, and so, in our own way, do we. 300,000 years later, the fear is the same, and so, somehow, is the comfort we build against it.